Hi, everybody. It's Susan again, and I just wanted to talk to you this time about something more general about astrology. I often get questions about what to listen to in terms of these more general reports that I post and that many astrologers post on YouTube. So the first thing to notice is that you will have a very distinct chart. These readings are always going to be general, and it's never possible to account for all the unique differences of each individual natal chart. So what we do is we generalize the ascendant sign, we generalize the moon sign, and we generalize the sun sign. And we do that by these different placements that we put the houses in different positions through the chart. So each time we would look at the ascendant, of course, the ascendant would be, and it always is, in the first house. Then when we want to look at the moon, we put the moon in the first house. And we call that a separate chart, a different chart. It's not actually a different chart. It's just an easier way of thinking about it conceptually when you're starting out. And I'll show you examples in a minute. And then same thing for the sun. We put the sun in the first house, a solar chart or a lunar chart is what those are called. And then we count from there. And from those houses, we start to get more information. Because of course, you're a very multi-dimensional individual. And your life is not happening only in this outer plane, which is mostly what we see from the ascendant. The ascendant is the reference point for you appearing on the scene the moment that you were born. This is you showing up in the world. It's the self, it's the notion of self and how you navigate life. It also is how you filter life inwards. So it's a two-way street. You either gather information inwards and you take it in as that ascendant. In this case, it happens to be a Cancer ascendant as I'm doing this video. It just happens to be on a 24th of January at 4 p.m. Universal Time. And so as that ascendant is Cancer, that energy of taking in information will come through a Cancerian way. And all of the different placements in the chart are going to have that Cancerian impact, let's say, in the individual's life. So only a Cancer has Sagittarius on the sixth house. No other sign has Sagittarius um, in the sixth house. And so we know if a Cancer is there with Sagittarius in the sixth house and the ruler of Cancer, this is coincidence, by the way, it just happened to be a really lovely teaching moment. The ruler of Cancer is also in the sixth house. That means that the interest or the effort or a lot of the time and energy of this individual with a Cancer ascendant is spent in the sixth house. And that means that there's a lot of sense of duty and obligation around everyday stuff. There might be a lot of changeability and certainly a lot to do because it's ruled by Jupiter overall. We see Sagittarius is always ruled by Jupiter, so we want to see also the flavor of Jupiter wherever Jupiter rules. That means a lot, basically, if you're going to boil it down to a short description. Jupiter means a lot in the sixth house. It means there's a lot going on, but at the same time, also there's a delight with Jupiter in doing these tasks. Now, that would depend on a natal chart and whether that Jupiter is also as delighted as it might sound on paper. But that's getting a little deeper into the layers of astrology. I'm just trying to give you an indication of why we look at these three different points when we're talking about a general chart. So we start with the ascendant because it represents the self. It represents you. It's the way that you engage with life and how the different flavors of each house show up in your life. For example, for Cancer rising, the 10th house is ruled by Aries. Cancer rising is very pioneering, very outgoing, very original, and very personally involved in what they do out in the world, whether that's a career or any other thing. The Cancers tend to be very spiritual people because they've got Pisces on the ninth house, also much like the sixth house, ruled by Jupiter. And so there's a kind of a quality that is inherent to Cancer. There's a sort of a quiet spirituality that is built in to the rising sign of Cancer. All right, so and of course that applies to the sun and moon too, but let me come to that. So especially here, what we're doing is we're counting from the ascendant all of the different houses away. So we saw here that the ruler of the ascendant, the moon, is 6 houses away from the ascendant. So in the case of the sun, it's 8 houses away from the ascendant. So I would say, for example, if I'm doing a reading for Cancer, I'd say, well, oh, look, there's where the new moon is. That just happens to be the theme of this particular week. As the 29th of January, we have a new moon in Aquarius. And so I'd say, oh, look, the new moon is happening in your eighth house. And then I delineate that. And if you want to know more about that, I've posted a video on that. But then let's take away the ascendant just to avoid confusion. I'm just going to remove that. And then we're going to move forward in time. And we're going to put now the moon on the first house, which means now we're looking at a lunar heart, a lunar chart, or a lunar house system. And this is a very interesting way of looking at your life from the inside out. So, your interior experience of life, the moon represents your mind, your memory, your emotional body, your emotions in general, how you express your emotions, your preferences, as well as the way that you desire things, the soul's urges. Um, we have a certain overlap with Venus and the moon, but Venus is more in terms of taste, preference, and the moon is more like what makes me feel comfortable, what makes me feel safe. And so here we have the moon in the first house, and in this case, it happens to be in Sagittarius for the example that I'm using here. So a Sagittarius moon, if we were reading from that, we would count from the moon all the different houses as we go through the chart. And for example, I used the new moon in Aquarius as the example. So let's say, well, now for Sagittarius moon, we have the new moon happening in the third house. Well, the third house for Sagittarius is Aquarius. And so there's a new way of thinking here. There's a new moment in time which allows you to think differently. And of course, the moon, as I mentioned, is about the mind and the memory and your emotional body and how you interiorize your life. It also represents home. It can represent your relationship to your mother or older women in general, or even your own nature as a mother, for example. That's another way that that can show up. So now we have something happening here in the third house from the moon. And so that's putting a lot of energy and dynamism in the extended family area of the chart, in communications, in siblings, in reference to learning and willpower and so on. But how do you feel about these things? It's one thing to want to do these certain things, and that you get much more from the ascendant or even from the sun. But the moon is, how do I feel about all that? Is this working for me? Do I have any nervousness, anxiety, or worries around this third house thing that's happening, this new thing? Am I reaching out in communication in a way that's going to be emotionally supportive? And how does that make me feel? So that's kind of the bottom line of the moon, is how do I relate to my life from the inside out? How does all of these events that are happening make me feel? So let's say earlier you were looking as if you had a Cancer rising. So you would listen first for your Cancer rising, then you could listen for your Sagittarius moon and get more elements of information. But instead of thinking about how the world is shaped on the outside and how you're interacting with those events and those things happening, you're now thinking about, how do I feel about all that? How is that impacting me psychologically, emotionally, and so on? Again, as I mentioned, the moon references our emotional body, the mind, and that includes, of course, psychological states. Does this make me happy or not, for example? So that's one way of looking at the moon. And then if we go forward, we want to put the sun on the first house, and that means now we're looking at a solar chart. For example, if somebody comes to me and they want a reading and I don't have a birth time for them, they don't know when they were born. Sometimes I get adopted people, for example, or people who have been in some way, shape, or form, separated from their family very young, and they don't have documents. And so when I do that chart, I will look at the sun on the first house, and I'll also look at the moon if it's a reliable moon, meaning that it's quite close to the center of the sign, the middle of the sign. I will also look at the moon. But the sun we can be pretty sure of. I've only encountered one person who wasn't sure of the day that they were born. So that was a whole different story. But most people know what day they were born. And so from the sun, we're going to do the exact same thing. We calculate how many different houses away from the sun is the event that we're describing here. Here we're going to pretend that we're talking about a new moon in Sagittarius. These are all theoretical. This is not transit stuff. Okay, so this is a theoretical new moon that we're going to talk about in Sagittarius. Well, for Aquarius, and only for Aquarius, Sagittarius is the 11th house. 11 houses away from Aquarius is Sagittarius. And that puts this lunar event in the 11th house. Well, that's all about friends and something outward going. It's about social dynamics. And of course, indeed, that is why Aquarius is known as very socially engaged. It's precisely because Jupiter rules the 11th house, and Sagittarius is the sign on the 11th house. So I'll do a separate video on that because I think it's helpful to understand those dynamics as well. So this event, we'll call it a lunar event in the 11th house, is going to carry the flavor of what does Aquarius want to do about this? The sun is about the self, but in the sense of how do I engage in my life with purpose? What are my intentions in this moment? How do I see my value in contributing or doing something in this moment? That tends to be why we represent the career there as well, with the sun representing a person's purpose or mission in life, which often is the career. Not always. Sometimes that's quite separate from the work that people do. The sun is also the consciousness of one's self. So this is me showing up in my life. It's a little bit like the ascendant, but with a dynamism, an outward directed activity. And here we see, oh, well, actually, here I am putting a lot of new energy, new awareness in the 11th house area of my life. So from the solar perspective, this, whether it be my career or whether it be my personal life, my social life, I want to get out there and network. I want to participate in 11th house things. I want whatever is going to be happening in this 11th house lunar event is going to contribute to my overall goals and aims in life, because that's the notion that the sun brings to everything, the sense of what am I doing with my life and how should I engage with those things. So, for example, that could also represent gains coming from the work that the person does, because this 11th house is the second house from the 10th house. So that's the gains that you get from the work that you do, or from your career, or from your social status. It's accolades as well, maybe because of the career or because of the person's way of engaging in life. They're getting recognition and accolades for that. The 11th house is the stage as well. It's how we perform, how we reach out into the world. So maybe there's something that becomes more highlighted in terms of what that person is doing. And that event coming 11 houses from their sun is actually highlighting an essence of who they are, putting that out there. It can also be about networking and about creating new contacts that will be beneficial towards a better future or a vision of a future. And the 11th house indeed also has that quality of, how do I see the future? How do I want to move forward into the future? So these are just ideas of how we use the sun, the moon, and the ascendant sign to show you what's happening in your life at any given time. And this is why I encourage people to listen for these three placements. Now, additional to that, if you have a stellium, which means there's a lot of planets, here maybe we'll see it better if we pull up the current situation. I'm just going to add in some of the other points that are currently activating the house of the second house of this particular chart, which is Pisces. So this is a stellium. It's a variation of a stellium. Traditionally, a stellium would be 4 or a minimum 3 plus. I look really for 4. Place very important placements or planets in a house, but not usually including the outer planets. So we're going to cheat a wee bit. This is extraordinary times, and we'll call this a stellium. So it depends. Everybody has their own way of getting excited about stelliums. So just sharing different perspectives on that. So here we have a Pisces stellium. Now, even though this individual has a sun in Aquarius, and let's imagine this is a natal chart. So this individual would have a sun in Aquarius and a moon in Sagittarius. This person has a lot of energy going on in Pisces. Now, remember, I'm pretending that this is a natal chart. We're ignoring the fact that this is also the current transits, okay? This is for educational purposes only. So this event, or this stellium, this pileup of energy that's there in this individual's second house, should also be considered an important point of reference. And so, as well as the ascendant, the sun, and the moon, this individual should listen for what's going on in Pisces. What's going on there? Because that will give you a lot of information from the perspective of where all of these planets are always being triggered, because whenever somebody has a stellium, things happen in rapid fire and are often quite life-changing. The transits, because they affect so many different placements simultaneously, are often quite life-changing. So listening for the stellium might actually bring you more information and more of a sense of who you feel yourself to be than even listening for your sun, for example, or listening to the moon sign. This explains for some people why they don't resonate with the ascendant sun or moon or whichever of the three, but they seem to feel different than the chart indicates. And that would, of course, depend from one chart to another. So I hope I haven't complicated this too much. I get that question so often that I wanted to be able to point to a video that people could just check in and have a look and see why we use these concepts of what are known as derived houses to be able to arrive at the understanding that we do, right? So derived houses simply means that we place whichever planet that we're looking at in the first house and we count from that planet. And by the way, you can do that for any planet in the chart. You can do that for Venus to find out the quality of relationships, imagining that this is this person's actual natal chart. We're looking at Venus in Pisces. And right next to Venus in Pisces, there's a Chiron, and it's in a semi-sextile. So we say, "Oh, this person, although they want relationships and they're really working so beautifully in relationships, they're a little bit stuck in a way, over romanticizing, we would say. Saturn is getting close, so maybe not feeling a little restricted. And also, they're a little bit shy. There's something going on that makes them feel unworthy or makes it difficult. But here we have Mars. They're passionate about it. Even if things don't really work out, they'll still keep going. They'll still keep going. So that's just one way of looking at the chart as if Venus were the first planet. And we look and we count second house, third house, fourth house, fifth house, for example. So I hope I haven't confused you completely. Do ask your questions in the comments. This is an important basic element of astrology to understand. And I will share more of these kinds of videos as we go forward because I get some of the same questions piling up all the time. All right. All the best to you. I'll see you in the next video.